Good afternoon from London, where IAFOR is currently holding a joint conference on education, arts and humanities, language learning, and aging and gerontology. I am standing here with Dr. Marcelo Staricoff. Could you briefly introduce yourself and what it is that you do?
Yes, thank you so much, Melina. I'm so delighted and honored to be here today at my first IAFOR conference. I am Marcelo Staricoff. I'm currently a lecturer in education at the University of Sussex, and previously to that I was a primary head teacher and primary teacher, and previously to that I had a career in as a scientist, a research scientist, and in between headship and university I took the time to write a book which is called The Joy of Not Knowing, and which contains the whole philosophy of education that developed during my time in education and in science. So yeah, that's me today. And I'm currently now part of the committee for the IAFOR conferences as well. So I'm really delighted representing the University of Sussex.
We're very glad to have you on board with us. Thank you so much.
It's a great honor and privilege. Yeah.
Today is the first plenary day of our conference,
Yes.
and you just finished giving a keynote presentation.
Yes.
Can you talk to us a little bit about what it was?
So I had a great honor to be one of the keynotes this morning, which I enjoyed so much. And I was presenting to the audience the principles and philosophies that underpin the joy of not knowing approach, and philosophy of education and of school leadership to the audience, and sending out the message that the key to education and the key to how education can make such an impact on how societies develop is how students feel and how children feel when they're in a position of not knowing. And the idea behind that is that usually when we find ourselves in a position of not knowing, the human instinct is to feel worried and anxious and feeling that we can't do things if they're too difficult and all that sorts of things. So I've always been fascinated by how we can present or create the cultures in classrooms that remove that fear and replace that fear with an enthusiasm for wanting to know. And I think that is such an exciting prospect in the world of education. And the premise with that is that if we explain to the students, through the model that I presented today, that if we know the answer to a question, it means that we're not learning anything new because we already knew it. But in knowing the answer to something, as humans, make us feel really comfortable, doesn't it? Whereas if we don't know the answer to something, we suddenly feel apprehensive and worried and anxious. But it's really interesting for the children to then realize that in fact that is the only time that we're learning something new. So the premise is that in order to learn something new, we have to not know it first. And that's a transformational realization for children, particularly young children, who are always trying to seek knowing, always trying to be within an educational system that rewards knowledge and rewards getting things right and ticks, that traditional thing. So it's quite an eye-opening process to go through with the children, to actually get them to realize that in order to learn something new, they have to be in a position of not knowing initially. And when they accept that, it's like a huge release, emotional release, in terms of how they then feel about being in positions of not knowing. And then they start to seek that position rather than seeking the position of comfort, as we heard today, of the path of least resistance. And they start to seek challenge, they start to seek opportunities for that develop that curiosity that places them in positions of not knowing, with the comfort that they will have, or that the culture in the classroom gives them all they need, all the tools, resources, skills, and positions that they need to be able to thrive whilst they're in that position of discomfort. So the idea is that we tend to say that the role of education is to make children feel comfortable with being uncomfortable. So we're not denying that learning is difficult, takes effort, it places us in an uncomfortable scenario. But we're saying that there's so many opportunities to create classrooms that I call them, that function as communities of inquiry. So values-based, children's rights-based, that enable children to take risks with their thinking, with their learning, and to feel really happy to start in a position of confusion, of difficulty, of not knowing. So it's really trying to view education from a very different position compared to the traditional position that we sometimes find in educational systems, where the teacher kind of provides all the knowledge and the student learns that knowledge. So yeah, it's an exciting proposition that I shared with the audience today.
I think it's a very refreshing perspective that you take away the stress from students, because especially in your book was translated into Chinese, and you said you don't understand why, but actually Asian societies place a lot of importance on education and their children getting great marks and stressing them out, having no experience outside of the education system, always writing, always studying. And your refreshing perspective is that you want to take that stress away of students and say that it's okay to be wrong, it's okay to not know.
Absolutely. Which is the realization that that's a starting point for all of us, is always the position of not knowing, is the big realization that makes such a difference. So it's not a position of deficit or something to be ashamed of or to be worried about. It's where we all must be in order to learn something new. But then, having developed this concept in my career, I then looked at ways of then supplementing that concept with, okay, if we are placing students in a position of discomfort knowingly, and we tell them, then what we have to do is provide the conditions in which they will feel able to thrive. And that's where I developed a lot of work around values-based education and providing the curriculum in a way that develops them as effective lifelong learners, rather than just students who are happy to gain knowledge. So it's developing those skills that will enable them to then contribute to society positively through the delivery of the curriculum. And so I did a lot of work around lifelong learning dispositions and how we integrate those within the curriculum delivery. And also a lot of work around giving students agency to think and to co-construct the learning that takes place during each session. So when you create community of inquiry in the classroom, you're also instilling in them that sense of questioning, of critical analysis, of thinking philosophically, of asking all the questions that will lead, that lead from their curiosity, and that enables them to think very critically, creatively, and that enables them to feel that they have an intrinsic motivation to want to learn, as opposed to an extrinsic motivation based on certificates or stickers and things. So, it's also trying to deliver for them all their rights. So, the Joy of Non Philosophy education is based on creating the conditions through a values-based approach that enables their rights to be met so that effective learning can then take place. I'm very much placing the purpose of education at the heart of the teaching and learning process, because the students, the children from very early on realize that the learning has meaning for themselves and for their lives outside of the classroom. So it's equipping them with the strategies, dispositions, skills, knowledge to then be able to contribute positively to society. And that's what really excites me so much.
Which brings me to my next question. That is all nice and well what happens in the classroom,
yes.
But what is happening for decades now is that children grow up to become citizens,
yes.
and go out into the world and meet a completely different world from the accepting world of the classroom,
yes.
you may say.
Absolutely.
How can
yes.
we ensure that they continue this kind of inquisitive behavior, yes. and that curiosity,
yes.
and
absolutely
respect
right.
for others?
Well, that is such a great point, and it starts from the fact that I believe that they're born natural philosophers, and they're born natural inquirers, and they're born thinking like scientists, and they're born wanting to investigate and to find out. That's how they're born. So I always see the purpose of education as its role is to nurture that, and the way that then has an impact further on in their lives. As you're saying, when they go into, when they grow up and go more into the aspects of contributing to society, is that the Joy of Not Knowing approach is based on the fact that when you acquire knowledge, the students realize that that's only their first step. So that's where it differentiates from more traditional educational systems or pedagogies, because once they gain the knowledge, they are encouraged to develop a deep understanding of that knowledge. That developing that deep understanding of the knowledge is reliant on them linking that knowledge, that new knowledge that they have, to the outside world and to their lives. And the third aspect of that is that they then develop wisdom with which to use that understanding and new knowledge for the good of society. So that's where all the engaging them in philosophical inquiry plays a big role, because in order to develop that wisdom with which to use the new knowledge that they have and the understanding they have to have a very thorough understanding of how society works, how the world works, be able to value and get a sense of different points of views. So it's very much upon having that sense of openness and of considering all the options that there are, so they make the decisions based on the consideration of all the options. That's what this culture creates. So it's not a single-minded one way only. It's that consideration of all the aspects, everyone's different points of view. And the most amazing thing that can ever happen in the classroom for me is to have these discussions for the children to see that the learning has been relevant now and will be for later, linking it to real life, and for the student to say, at the beginning of the lesson I used to think this, now I think this. That sense of being able to change their minds, to be open to other points of views, to have developed that sense of real critical thinking that has enabled them to see things either more deeply or from a different point of view, that they then say, now I think differently. I think that's the biggest trait that I think is necessary in society.
And to bring it to the local context, since we are in London,
yes.
and to tie it into the rest of the presentations that we had today,
yes.
Where we talked a lot about migrants and refugees,
yes.
and access to higher education,
yes.
and how to accept those refugees and migrants.
Yes.
How does your model of the joy of not knowing apply to this kind of situation where
yes.
you could have a classroom with refugee children
yes.
who do not necessarily fit into the classroom
That's
at first?
such a brilliant question, Melina, because at the heart of the joy of not knowing approach is the co-construction of the learning that draws upon all the richness of language and culture that every child brings to the session. So it's very much, it's a really lovely, one of the things that I suggest that works best is to start the learning objective with a question, with an investigative question or a philosophical question. That allows a discussion, the initial discussion of what is about to be learned, to be contributed by all the students. So you're valuing the experiences that everyone brings, which the teacher may have no knowledge of if they just deliver the learning. But if you allow for that initial discussion where all these different points of views come in, then the art of the teacher is to shape all that, like a lump of clay on a pottery wheel. You shape it all. You had your initial idea, but now it's shaped by the views of everyone. Then everyone feels really valued and included, and they see from their own perspective the meaning for them of that learning. And I call that multilingual thinking in multicultural classrooms. So as we were saying today, even in terms of inclusivity, say a child that has not lived that doesn't have total command of the language of instruction would be able to access the learning using their own, all the richness of language that they have, not just restricted to the language of instruction. So imagine that a refugee child that's just come, and it happened to me when I first came to England. I couldn't speak any English at all. I only had Spanish. So my idea is that the language should not be the barrier, and we should allow the presentation of the curriculum and the engagement with the learning to fully embrace all the cognitive ability that the child has without placing barriers in the way.
It's a very refreshing
Yes.
methodology where we also bypass the teacher's bias.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Very refreshing.
Yes,
and
yes.
I hope
And
to
it's-
see more of that.
Yes, and it's a way of there's a within the joy of not knowing approach. There's at the heart of it is agency, is personal agency of the child. So there are so many opportunities for the child to say, this is what we're learning, the kind of the broad aspect. This is where I want to take it. This is what I'm really interested in. This is what I want to go deeper or broader in once they have those concepts. So there's a huge amount of agency given to the children to take things wherever they want to. And we always say that anything and everything is possible, with the joy of not knowing.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Marlene. Thank you.